glowing objects battled across the sky in 1561 Nuremberg. In 1972, a group carried out one of the strangest paranormal experiments in history, and in 1930, an entire Inuit village vanished overnight. These are real incidents that make you question reality. You don't often hear about UFO stories from the 1500s, and that's exactly why I find this case so incredibly fascinating. In Nuremberg, on the early morning of April 14th, 1561, people stepped outside to see the sky absolutely filled with mysterious flying objects, glowing spheres, cylinders, crosses, hundreds of them. And they were all battling each other. People watched as these red arcs shot out these smaller balls and rods that started slamming into each other, spinning wildly through the air. This went on for over an hour. Witnesses described the objects like they were exhausted warriors, eventually falling toward the ground in clouds of smoke, burning as they dropped. And then this massive black spear appeared in the sky, stretching across from one horizon to another, motionless against the morning light while everything else was in chaos. Absolutely insane story, right? But there were all these witnesses, unable to make any sense of what the hell they were seeing. There were tons of illustrations at the time too, depicting the eyewitness accounts, and they're nuts to look at. And there are theories as to what people saw, possibly a mirage. Some have said it was flocks of birds, but I don't know, doesn't sound likely. So what happened? Were people watching alien ships battle in the sky? Who the hell knows? But I, for one, would love to go back in time and see this for myself. So back in 1972, a group in Toronto wanted to do an experiment surrounding ghosts. But they weren't just testing whether ghosts were real. They wanted to see if ghosts aren't spirits of the dead, but something we create with our own minds. Dr. A.R.G. Owen and his team invented a ghost from scratch. They named him Philip Aylesford and created a whole backstory for him. Basically, they invented a character. They made him a nobleman from the 1600s who had a tragic romance that led to a lonely death. A pretty standard ghost story, except this wasn't based on any real historical event. They drew his portrait and described his old English estate, talking about him like he was a real person that they knew. Their first meetings were pretty normal. They just sit around talking about Philip's fake life. But once they started holding seances, the atmosphere started to change. Their tables started trembling. Then came the knocks, soft at first, then sharp and clear. They'd ask Philip questions, and the knocks would answer, one for yes, two for no. Week after week, things escalated. The table would slide across the floor by itself. The lights would flicker. People felt cold drafts against their skin, even when all the windows were shut. And some swore they heard faint laughter or whispers that didn't belong to anyone there. When they finally did a live seance in front of 50 witnesses, people in the audience felt a presence, heard things moving around, but nothing showed up on the recording equipment. Philip only seemed to exist when people believed he did. They had set out to prove that hauntings were purely psychological, but they ended up creating something that felt genuinely real to everyone in that room. So if belief alone could move furniture and drop the temperature, then where does imagination end and reality begin? Joe LaBelle was a fur trapper who knew the routes around Lake Anjikuni in Canada's Northwest Territories pretty well. In November 1930, he showed up at a small Inuit village he'd visited before. About 25 people lived there. What he was expecting to see was smoke from fires, people preparing for winter, and kids running around, but what he found was completely quiet. Food was still hanging on drying racks. Clothes were folded inside tents. Tools were sitting right where someone had been using them. Then LaBelle found the dogs, all dead, still tied up, frozen solid. Then he reached the burial ground, and every grave had been dug up. They were now all empty. But there were no tracks leading out of the village. LaBelle rushed to alert the Mounties, who investigated but couldn't come up with a solid explanation. And when newspapers ran the story in 1931, the police suddenly denied the whole thing ever happened. After that, there were all kinds of theories. Forced relocation by the government, mass kidnapping. People also talked about glowing lights over the lake around that time. So what happened? Is the story a hoax? Did something happen that the authorities wanted buried? Or did something genuinely unexplainable take place? We may never know. It was mid-morning break at Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, September 16th, 1994. About 60 kids between 6 and 12 years old were outside playing while their teachers were inside having a meeting. Suddenly, the children started seeing silver objects drop from the sky, landing in the brush just past the playground fence. And then figures stepped out. Short beings dressed in black with big bulbous eyes. A bunch of them panicked and ran back toward the school, but some stayed and watched, and this is where it gets really bizarre. The children said these beings communicated with them telepathically, not speaking out loud, but putting thoughts directly into their heads. The message was about Earth, warnings about pollution, technology, humans destroying the planet. When they told their teachers what had happened, they obviously didn't believe them. But that night, the kids all went back to their parents. And by the next day, everyone in the area was talking about it. The story hit the radio, and soon UFO researcher Cynthia Hind showed up, followed by a BBC reporter, Tim Leach, and Harvard psychiatrist John Mack. He interviewed the students separately, and their drawings all matched up, and the descriptions were almost identical. And decades later, many of those witnesses, now adults, with normal lives and careers, still insist that they saw something that day. The summer of 1980 brought a big marching band competition to Hollinwell Showground in Nottinghamshire, England. Hundreds of young performers had traveled from all over the East Midlands, some for hours, all excited to compete. The show started around 9 in the morning. By 10:30 though, people started collapsing. At first it was just a few students here and there, and then dozens, and then what looked like hundreds. One witness said they were, quote, falling down like 9 pins. Some turned pale and couldn't stop shaking. Many were vomiting and dizzy, saying their limbs felt like they had no bones in them. A few complained their eyes and throats were burning. Some adults in the crowd were affected too. At least 259 people ended up being rushed to the hospital. Nobody could figure out what had caused this. They tested everything: food, water, checked for radiation or pesticide spraying in the nearby fields. Eventually, the leading theory was that it was caused by a chemical called tridomorph, a pesticide that later got banned for being hazardous, but it can't say for sure if that's what it was. And there's this detail that still bothers people to this day. Some witnesses swore that even the horses near the showground collapsed. Whatever happened at Hollinwell is still considered one of Britain's most disturbing mass fainting events. The Sutton family farmhouse in rural Kentucky became the setting for one of the strangest nights in the history of UFO cases. It was August 21st, 1955. 8 adults and 3 young ones were staying at the house when Billy Ray Taylor went outside to get water from the well. And that's when he spotted a flying saucer-looking thing streak across the sky and land about a half-mile away. He ran back inside to tell everyone, but they just laughed it off. And then when the family dog started losing its mind, barking and snarling at something outside, Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray grabbed their firearms. They went to check it out and saw movement in the trees. What came out wasn't an animal or an intruder though, at least not the human kind. There were a bunch of small figures, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, with these grotesquely thin limbs, huge heads, glowing yellow eyes, and bat-like ears. Lucky fired at one from close range. He heard a metallic ping sound as it fell backward, then watched it pop right back up and disappear into the shadows. For 4 hours straight, these creatures kept showing up, peering through their windows and scratching at the doors. One dropped down on Taylor from the roof when he stepped outside to fire at them again. The family held them off until the sun came up, then piled into their car and drove straight to the Hopkinsville police station. When investigators arrived at the farm, they found bullet holes, broken windows, and this strange glowing patch of soil where the family said the creatures had been standing. And that was the last anyone in town heard from the Sutton family. Steve McCalloch was a 50-year-old mechanic from Winnipeg who liked exploring the wilderness around Falcon Lake, Manitoba. May 20th, 1967 started as a normal day for him until he encountered something that left him with burns and a story that would go down in history as one of Canada's most infamous UFO reports. He flagged down a passing constable, saying he'd been burned by one of 2 glowing, rotating objects that he'd seen. Spaceships, he called them. When officers checked him out, his shirt and hat were scorched. That evening, he went for medical treatment. He had first-degree burns, described as irregular, blotchy marks about the size of silver dollars. Days later, McCalloch went public with the story, showed photos of the burns, provided detailed drawings of the disc-shaped craft. According to him, one of the ships landed, a door opened, and bright violet light poured out. He heard hissing air and voices that sounded human. He tried communicating in multiple languages, English, Russian, German, but got no response. When the ship took off, it left a circular indentation in the ground. After that, McCulloch started experiencing headaches, vomiting, and noticed this strange smell he couldn't identify. The RCMP got involved, so did the Canadian Air Force and later US researchers. A month later, McCulloch went back to the site with a partner, collected soil samples, and the soil did show to be slightly radioactive. The ground also had this semicircle where moss had been completely eviscerated. The townsfolk in Devon, England woke up one morning in February of 1855 to something nobody could make sense of. Heavy snow had fallen overnight, and there were tracks everywhere. Only seems natural, but these were very odd tracks. They were hoof-like prints, 4 inches long, 3 inches wide, in a single straight line. They crossed fields, went over rivers, they were on people's rooftops. Some of the prints went straight up and over narrow walls. People kept reporting them over the next few days. They weren't just in one neighborhood. They showed up miles apart. Whatever made them could either move impossibly fast or was appearing in multiple places at once. People were genuinely scared. Newspapers tried calling them mysterious animal tracks, but everyone else was whispering about the devil, especially when preachers brought up the footprints during sermons. In the 170 years since, people have tried explaining it away. Maybe it was some sort of hopping animal, an elaborate prank. We can't say for sure. All we know is that someone or something was out there in that snow that night. Back in October of 2010, something strange happened near the Michigan-Wisconsin border. Folks in Menominee felt the ground shake, and a huge crack suddenly opened up on a woman named Eileen Hyder's property. She said, "I was sitting watching television on my recliner and I started moving. It was weird, maybe only lasted 15 seconds. The crack was massive though, 360 feet long, with a ridge about 6 feet high stretching the length of a football field. People, of course, assumed an earthquake had happened, but Michigan Technological University researchers ruled that out. Wayne Pennington, the dean of Michigan Tech's College of Engineering, was completely shocked by what he saw and said nothing even registered on a seismograph. After studying the site, the team concluded that what's called a pop-up had occurred. This basically is when underground pressure on the limestone beneath the area suddenly releases, pushing the ground up and forming a massive crack like this. Usually it's caused by the removal of a glacier, but the glacier left here 11,000 years ago, so why did it wait until 2010 to happen? Pennington said. This type of pop-up is extremely rare. The pressure in that area had likely been building up for thousands of years, and whatever triggered it finally gave way in 2010. So, I don't know, what do we take from that? That sometimes cracks can open up in the ground unexpectedly, I guess? That's great to know. All that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, next time.